In 2003, Activision published True Crime: Streets of LA for the Sony PlayStation 2. The premise of the game had the character of Nick Kang deal with the criminal elements of Los Angeles while dealing with various other circumstances within the game's story. One of the main aspects of popularity within the game at the time was the fact that it was one of the first non-Grand Theft Auto related open world concept games released after Grand Theft Auto 3 in 2001. Influencing factors for the game as well as the character of Nick Kang was Hong Kong-based martial arts movies. True Crime: Streets of LA proved to be mildly popular as both the game as well as the character of Nick Kang were received well by gamers and critics. Due to the decent success of the game with Nick Kang, a proposed sequel was announced in 2004, but other than the initial announcement, nothing else was heard about the sequel for nearly a year, when in 2005 Activision revealed details that the game was so massive that increased development of the sequel, True Crime 2, with more resources from the company put into the game, which explained the lack of any news at the time. Later development of the game had the concept of it being completely remade and reworked, even creating a new main character by the name of Marcus Reed, and a new plot and story for this game. This game wasn't a sequel to the first True Crime, but instead a new installment of the franchise. Upon release of the sequel, called True Crime: New York City, it was later considered a failure due to the gaming reception as well as critics' reactions to the game. As mentioned, the game was heavily invested by Activision, and the failure of True Crime: New York City was a massive blow to the company. Gamers and critics expected the return of Nick Kang in the sequel and the possible continuation of his story, but was taken aback when another completely new character and story was created instead. Originally, True Crime: New York City was intended as a two-part series, but since the game was so negatively received by the gaming community, the second part was abandoned. The game did so horribly, in fact, that Activision cancelled any further plans for the franchise. But in 2007, they released plans for a proposed game being set in Hong Kong, but being unrelated to the True Crime series. This game was originally titled Black Lotus. The game was put into development in 2008. Eventually, this proposed game was incorporated into the True Crime franchise due to the similarities it had with the True Crime gaming universe. In 2009, the game's title was changed to True Crime Hong Kong, and originally intended for a 2010 release, and development was later delayed until 2011 for quality assurances. Sources later mentioned that due to the reaction to the True Crime franchise having a decent reception from Los Angeles with Nick Kang to a negative reaction with New York City and Marcus Reed, Activision later decided that the franchise would have been better off abandoned and no further investment or risk put into it. Square Enix later acquired the publishing rights to the game, as they didn't buy the actual rights to the franchise, which were retained by Activision, and instead released the spiritual successor with Sleeping Dogs, released in 2012, with the main character of Wei Shen, whom was then a modernized version of Nick Kang. In 2014, Activision abandoned the True Crime trademark completely, and the story as well as the character of Nick Kang will be permanently dead. Sometimes a character can be forgotten because too much was expected from them, and not enough investment or care were made for them.